privatisation of railways has been a failure. Though they managed to secure an entry for Prime Minister John Major in the annals of privatisation, it is a service which Margaret Thatcher was not willing to privatise because of the huge problems, but John Major was desperate to get an entry in the annals of privatisation, so here we are. In 1994, when the old British Rail was broken up into more than 100 companies, it was one of the most efficient in Europe. It had the cheapest fare. It had one of the cheapest fares per mile in Europe and had a punctuality rate of 86.4%. And it was receiving at that time annual subsidy of £1.7 billion. The ideological breakup of British Rail resulted in fragmentation of the system, neglect of the long term, multiplication of administrative structures. Suddenly you needed 100 boards of directors, 100 accounting systems, 100 HR systems, 100 set of auditors, 100 sets of accountants. And all that inevitably pushed up the costs of the privatised system. And even worse, there was no real competition. I use the line C2C when I come to the house. There is no competition. I have absolutely no choice. I have to pay whatever they demand, and even though, like today, I had to stand all the way from my home in Essex to London because there were simply no seats and Wi-Fi was non-existent, but there's nothing I can do about it. I'm just a captive customer. 30 years after John Major's excursion into privatisation, train companies now have a punctuality rate of 70.1%. UK now has one of the most expensive train fares in Europe, and last year the subsidy was £11.9 billion. And I won't say anything about catering and the awful sandwiches on the long-distance routes at the moment, as many of the noble lords have possibly experienced that. So any move to curtail privatisation is most welcome, and I would support this bill. But that said, I have a number of questions which I hope the Minister would be able to clarify. Clause 1 of the bill states that the passenger services will in future be provided by a public sector company. Well, the question will be how are these public sector companies to be made accountable to the people? I would recommend that this public sector company, which could well be a number of companies akin to the railway boards which we used to have, at least 50% of their board of directors should be directly elected by customers. Customers should also vote on the executive pay, not only of those companies, but also the executive pay of the regulatory boards as well. That way, people can exercise some influence. They can't be taken for an easy ride. They can't be ripped off on a regular basis by providing suboptimal services. Hopefully, the Minister would be able to give some commitment to that form of democratisation. But I also have a question about how the new public sector company is going to acquire the necessary rolling stock. Let's look at the current situation. Currently, rolling stock is not owned by train operating companies. They lease it from rolling stock companies and pay an exorbitant amount of rent. Last year, some £3.1 billion was paid in leasing payments by train operating companies to Roscoe's or rolling stock companies. Just 3 rolling stock companies, Angel Trains, Eversholt, and Porterbrook, control about 87% of the market, and they have a profit margin of 41.6%. That is exorbitant. There is absolutely no justification for that kind of a profit margin because the payments are absolutely certain. They are paid either by customers or taxpayers. So hopefully the government is getting ready already, in a sense, to investigate the profiteering by these companies and put an end to this gravy train which has been operated by these rolling stock companies. These 3 rolling stock companies are foreign owned and they are registered in Luxembourg. which means they are obviously not paying the taxes there. There are only two reasons for companies to go in places like Luxembourg. One is secrecy, and second is tax avoidance. There is no other reason whatsoever for going to these places. These Roscoes last year paid a dividend of £409.7 million. And in the last decade, they have paid over £2 billion in dividends. This dividend is typically 100% of their pre-tax profits, and no tax is paid on those dividends either, because the recipients are outside the UK. So I do hope that the government is not going to continue with these Roscoes. So hopefully the Minister can confirm that. The government has choices. It can purchase rolling stock directly from the current manufacturers and eliminate all intermediaries, like the current Roscoes, or it can create its own leasing company and again eliminate these Roscoes, or it can perhaps bring manufacturing of trains and the rolling stock under one roof, in fact consolidate them. So it would be helpful if the Minister can explain which route the government is planning to take. Judging by the statement made by the Transport Secretary in the other place on 29th July, perhaps the government has something else in mind. Let me quote what the Transport Secretary said on 29th July. The failure of privatisation to deliver reliable and affordable services for passengers, that is the rationale for the current bill. Then the Minister added, it also makes financial sense, saving tens of millions of pounds each year in private sector fees. That money can now be reinvested in the railways. Running the railways in the interest of passengers and taxpayers, not to the benefit of shareholders, also makes operational sense. That statement was echoed by the Noble Minister earlier on. So I assume that following that statement, it is reasonable to expect that the current Roscoes will not remain in control, will not remain in operation. The government will not be leasing any trains from these companies. Hopefully the Minister can confirm that. And if my interpretation of that statement is erroneous, I would like to hear that as well. So, in addition, can the Minister also say what will happen to the freight services? Why are they not being brought into public ownership? They are highly lucrative as well. Finally, my Lords, can I ask the Minister to end what train companies call dynamic pricing? Actually, there is nothing dynamic about it. It is simply a way of fleecing customers. Two of my friends from Australia visited London and on the spur of a moment decided that they would like to visit Exeter. So a quick search online for next day's train, economy class return, quoted them £700 each. That is more than the flight to China. And that is, needless to say, they did not travel by train. And I wonder how many other tourists, as a result of this kind of fleecing, have refrained from visiting wonderful parts of the country. How many business trips have been put off? There is absolutely no excuse for this whatsoever. So can the Minister also assure the House that public ownership of passenger services will end this abusive practice? We need a fixed price, regardless of the time anybody travels, but not this, which is a £700 return to Exeter. That is just criminal, and I do hope somebody gets prosecuted for that. Thank you.